Join me while I make a mermaid doll. I've made mermaid dolls in the past, and I always like to experiment with the materials for the tail. For this, I used a two-way stretch sequin and an iridescent fabric. I wanted to layer the two because I thought, while separate, they both look kind of cheap, but together, they look expensive. I got creative with the fins because I was running out of fabric, but sometimes it's those moments that make the end result more special. I cut the iridescent fabric on the bias, and I also added a layer of green tulle that was stiff to give it a little more body. And then I spent a lot of time vacuuming up sequins. A lot of this doll is prep work. So I ironed the layers of the iridescent in between, and then I sewed each layer together on top of each other before actually assembling the tail. Right on the edge, this helps decrease the chances of slipping. And there I am with the tulle on the fin as well. And then I did the delicate process of turning this inside out. This iridescent fabric will tear, so I was being really delicate. After I turn them inside out, I run a top stitch around the edge of the shape of each of the side fins and the main fin, and then I do top stitching along the whole thing to create that fin look. I love to make dolls fast. Sometimes I get really excited, so it's important for me to remind myself to slow down and do all these precautionary steps, because then the end result ends up being that much better. And I always like to play along the way. So to get the tail together, I get the outside fins, and then I sew them to the top of the piece like this. So when I turn it inside out, it's all on the right side. I attach the front bottom fin and the back bottom fin to the tail separately, close the whole tail sandwich style, turn them inside out, and then do top stitching across the fins. When I was turning this one inside out, I definitely tore the tail in a few places, but I have a fix for that. So this is me sandwiching with the fins inside, and then this is after I've turned it inside out. It came out really pretty, even despite the little tears and imperfections. But sometimes you just have to embrace those and keep going. Especially on a fabric doll, I think you can get away with a little bit of worn edges. It makes you see how handmade it is. This is after I top stitched the bottom tail, and I just love the way it came out. It really gives that 80s doll fantasy. To decide on the skin color, I copied a sunburn that I got at the beach and decided to go something pinkier. I'm using the downloadable pattern I have on my website for the body. So if you want to make that, this tail pattern is also going to be available. You only need the top parts, obviously. And then I whipped together a little shell bra and cut it out, including the seam allowance. Look at me go. And then trace that and get it cut. I make the body parts according to how I make my dolls, which is where I trace the pattern pieces without seam allowance. Then I add the dart, then I sew the head together, snip the corners, and take the time to turn it all inside out, and then do the stuffing. I stuff the tail, and then I just run a top stitch across the tail, and then add the body on top like so. I'm doing this all by hand. Maybe in a future pattern I'll create it so the body and the tail are a little more seamless. I always think that looks better. I hate where artists always have to add a ruffle or whatnot to show where the tail joins to the torso of the mermaid. But it's up to you to figure out how you want this to look. Some people might just like it flat. I mean, you could do stones. You could glue rhinestones or Swarovskis as a way to join the two or blend the two. I ended up just getting a piece of the sequin fabric and cutting it and some corners, and then like kind of hand tacking and improvising. This is me squeezing the stuffing around, distributing so she has kind of like a nicer sit joint. Yeah, I don't like the way that seam looks, so I ended up adding this. I don't mind that it's just the sequin without the iridescent on top. I think it does give it a little bit of visual interest that's different. That little bit of sparkle and the way that the sequins kind of come up onto the skin makes it feel like a cool blend. But yeah, this part I just kind of improvised. I love hand sewing. That's where all of the magic kind of happens. So as you make your own doll, like figure out what works for you. Do you want to do a ruffle? Do you want to, you could make an outfit for her out of quote unquote seaweed that just covers up the seam. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So after I added the sequin piece, I just kind of sewed it on, and I couldn't stop playing with her every step of the way, clearly. I didn't even finish the stuffing. I didn't even finish putting her together yet. And the shells. Can't forget the shells. So, I just stitched down the lines, then I cut them out. These tiny pieces were pretty annoying to work with, but they turned out cute, and just go real close, trim. I could have just pleated them. That would have been a cute look, but instead I decided to top stitch everything, like the fins. And then it was time to pick her hair. I didn't make her wig out of yarn this time. I have all of these old doll wigs that I just need to use up. So I was determined to find the right one. I think this one's from like Rainbow High. This is an old BJT, but I've cut some tracks out of it, and the colors are really nice, but I don't like that transition from red. That color was nice, but it didn't work with the shells, and that made her too blue. I decided on this because it's the end of summer. I really wanted it to be tropical, and I had this extra red weft around, so I decided to sew a track in to kind of blend it better. And off camera, I ended up cutting. The last minute I thought, maybe I should do this wig, but I thought her bangs were a little too emo, so I ended up going with the red. But before I finished her, I wanted to repair some of the problem spots. I just use a bit of Mod Podge and run it across the seams, because the more that you play with her, the more these seams are just going to keep tearing. So I just get a little bit of Mod Podge. This was matte, and then I just, paint it and run it. And after it dried, I put her wig on and started to do all the finishing touches, finished the shells finally. I just turned that little nubbin in, and then I sewed them right onto her. And, in my world, mermaids have like a special algae that just sticks the boobs on the shells. I also don't mind shell bras. I know that some people don't like them, but I love them. You could also attach the shells to like a piece of string and make a little more of a bra. I decided to stitch her fingertips down. It's this tiny little detail I do that, to me, takes the doll's hands from looking like oven mitts into something a little more special. Then it was onto the face. I set out not really knowing what her face was going to be. I knew I kind of wanted to give her like a freshly sunburnt expression. She's a tropical mermaid, but mermaids live in the sea, so they don't get a lot of sun. But I was figured like maybe she went to the beach and like hung out a little too long under the beach. Of course, I start with pencil, and then I do my watercolor pencil. If you want a more detailed step-by-step of like how I do faces, I have another video in my DIY doll playlist. So I use watercolor pencils. When I go with the whites, I go really wet, and then while I wait for that to dry, I kind of go in with other stuff. I thought I ruined it when I started doing this like orange blushing. I really wanted her to have the sunburnt look, and I haven't really done that much color on a doll's face before, but it totally came together. Her expression ended up being like, of course, kind of like modelly and cute. It's like almost like she took the pictures at the beach before she realized that she was sunburnt. And then there she is, the finished beauty. This tail pattern is downloadable on my site, and if you don't have the body already, make sure you grab that too. And I always have trouble naming my dolls, so if you have a name for her, write it in the comments below. And if you like what you see, like and subscribe. Happy sewing.